Good morning, friends. I welcome you again to this channel where we are learning English language and literature. Friends, in this lecture today we are going to discuss the history of English literature. We are all the students of English literature, and as the students of English literature, it is very important for all of us to know the origin of English literature. If somebody asks you that you are the students of English literature, so what is the origin of this literature? From when did actually the writers start writing English literature? So you must have some basic idea about the beginning of English literature, and that is the reason why we are going to discuss the origin of English literature and how literature right from the beginning till in today's times, how the historians have divided literature into different phases, and all different phases of literature they are given some titles. So to begin with, if you want to go back to find out the roots of English literature, then you need to go back into the times of Anglo-Saxon period. Anglo-Saxon period means the times before 14th century. Geoffrey Chaucer, who is considered as the first English poet of our literature, before Geoffrey Chaucer also there were a host of writers, a host of authors who were producing literature here and there, and that literature was written in Old English language, and that period of Old English language is known as Anglo-Saxon period. So the period starting from the 5th century till 14th century, till the times of Geoffrey Chaucer, 5th to 14th century, that period is known as Anglo-Saxon period. That is the first phase in the history of English literature. Second phase, which is actually the beginning of English literature, is the age of Geoffrey Chaucer, the second half of the 14th century, starting from 1350 to 1400. And the next important phase in the history of English literature is the period of Renaissance, the age of Renaissance beginning from 15th century till the end of 16th century. To be precise, it begins from 1400 till 1578. The next important phase in the history of English literature is the Elizabethan Age, 1578 to 1625 or 30, and then we have the age of John Milton, Puritan Age. It is known as a Puritan Age also, 1625 to 1660. And the next phase is the age of Restoration, or it is also known as the age of John Dryden, 1660 to 1700. And then we have the age of Alexander Pope, starting from 1700 to 1740. and still the next age comes, which is given the name to by the name Dr. Johnson, the age of Dr. Samuel Johnson. Dr. Samuel Johnson was the first lexicographer of English language. He wrote the first dictionary of English language, Dr. Samuel Johnson. His age is starting from 1740 to 1798. And the next important stage in the history of English literature is the Romantic Revival, age of Romanticism. It is also known as the age of William Wordsworth, 1798 to 1830. And next important age is the Victorian era or the Victorian age from 1830 to 1890. And during this age, the poet laureate Lord Alfred Tennyson was an important literary personality. Robert Browning was also an important poet of this age. If you come to the next period, that is the modern age, starting from 1890 to 1930, the beginning of 20th century. T.S. Eliot, Ezra Pound, they were the important literary personalities, outstanding personalities in English literature, who are producing fantastic English literature in the beginning of 20th century, and this is known as the modern age. The postmodern age starts from 1930 till today's times. Okay, so these are some of the important stages of the history of English literature, beginning from Anglo-Saxon period, Old English period, beginning from the 5th century. In this video, today we are going to discuss the roots of English literature. We are going to discuss the origin of English literature, beginning from 5th century till 16th century. 16th century onwards, what was the contribution of the outstanding literary personalities in English literature, that we will discuss in some another video. But in this video, our main focus is to find out the beginning of English literature, to find out the roots of English literature, to know about the origin of English literature. So to begin with, we can say that in the beginning, during the Anglo-Saxon period, English literature has its roots there, And in the beginning, if I talk about the first century AD, even before the Anglo-Saxon period begins from the 5th century. If we go back even, then English society in those times, Celts, C-E-L-T-S, Celts is the name of one community which was living in that geographical area which is known as England in today's times. But later on, as the time passes, with the passage of time, English society started becoming a kind of mixture of different races, different communities. And these different communities are Angles, Saxons, Jutes, Celts, Normans, and all such people. But we must remember that Celts are considered as the original inhabitants of England. Celts was a tribe, was a community which was originally living in that geographical area which is known as England in today's times. So they are the original people, Celts. Then later on, during the 1st century, and to be precise, in 43 AD, the Romans invaded England. Okay, so the Romans now started living together with these Celts. So now there was a mixture of Celts and Romans. Okay, so two communities, two different races started living together during the 1st century. 43 AD is an important landmark in the history of England. Then later on, what happened during the 5th century, other races like Angles, Saxons and Jutes, they also settled in England during the 5th century. So three more tribes now came to live in England. Already Celts were living there, Romans came there in the 1st century, and during the 5th century, three more races now settled in England, and these three are Angles, Saxons and Jutes. Okay, so you can just imagine that 5 different races were now living together. Okay, who are the 5 races? Celts, Romans, Angles, Saxons and Jutes. They were all living together. Okay, and a new language came into existence during the after the 5th century, and that new language is known as Old English language. That is the original English language. It is also known as Anglo-Saxon English language. You must be wondering why England is known as England. Who gave this name to this country? The name of this country, England, actually comes from the tribes which is known as Angles, Angles. Angles was a community, was a race which was large in number during the 5th century in England, in that geographical area. So because of large number of people, Angles were living there, and that's why that geographical area was known as Angle land, Angles land, and that is why it was later on known as England. Angles land is known now as England. Okay, during the beginning period or during the earlier times of Old English language, this early civilization of this British people, this English people took place. Okay, the Celts, the Angles, the Saxons, the Jews, the Romans, slowly and gradually they were converted into Christianity. New religion called Christianity came over there in England, and that was the influence of Saint Augustine. Saint Augustine, who was a Christian missionary who spread the Christianity all across the country. And all these tribes, Celts, Angles, Saxons, Jutes and Romans, they were now slowly and gradually converted into Christianity, and now they started becoming civilized people. So first civilization took place after the 5th century in England, and after that civilization, people started producing oral literature. In the initial stage, in the beginning, oral literature was produced by the local people of England. Okay, so you can say these are the roots of English literature. Oral literature was first produced in the Anglo-Saxon period during the Old English period. Later on, Beowulf was published by Beowulf was published in the Old English language, and this, in fact, is considered as the first written document of English literature. So, friends, if somebody asks you what was the first work in English language, in English literature, then the answer is Beowulf. Beowulf was first written literary creation in English, and this is considered as the earliest and the greatest epic written in Old English language, Anglo-Saxon period, Anglo-Saxon original English language. This epic consists of more than 3,000 lines, okay, and in this epic, the life story of a great warrior is described in this epic, right? So, the beginning period from 5th to 14th century, during this period, you can just remember that mostly oral literature was produced by the local people of England, and Beowulf was the first written document, first written epic of English literature written in Old English language. Later on, during the 14th century, Geoffrey Chaucer came out as an important literary personality in England, and Chaucer became very popular. He earned name and fame by writing the Canterbury Tales. The Canterbury Tales is a collection of stories written in narrative style, where the poet Geoffrey Chaucer has narrated several stories, okay, in Middle English language. Beowulf written in the Old English, but now this Old English was influenced later on by French, by Latin, by Greek language, and it kept on changing. And by the time you come to the 14th century, the nature of English language was changed during 14th century, and the English which was spoken, which was used by the people during 14th century, was known as Middle English period, and Geoffrey Chaucer's The Canterbury Tales is written in this Middle English language. Troilus and Cressida is also considered as one of Chaucer's greatest works. Okay, his another work is the Parliament of Fowls. The Parliament of Fowls. In Middle English, it was written as Foules. Okay, but now we call it Parliament of Fowls, Fouls. So these are the three important works of Geoffrey Chaucer: the Canterbury Tales, Troilus and Cressida, and Parliament of Fowls. And that is why this period, starting from 1350 to 1400, is known as the Age of Chaucer. Why do we call it the Age of Chaucer? Because Geoffrey Chaucer was the most important poet during this period who produced fantastic narrative poetry, and that's why this age is known as the Age of Geoffrey Chaucer. Let's move ahead, and after 1400 means you can say the beginning of the 15th century and till the end of 16th century, this about 200 years, this period is known as the period of Renaissance. It is known as the period of Renaissance. Renaissance was a kind of a movement, it was a movement, literary movement or artistic movement, which took place, which began actually from Italy, traveled to France and came to England. Okay, and that movement is known as the movement of Renaissance. Renaissance means rebirth. Renaissance is a French word. If you translate that word into English, it means rebirth. Okay, this English Renaissance was a cultural and artistic movement in England during the 15th century, starting from 15th century till 17th century. It is associated with the pan-European Renaissance that is usually regarded as beginning in Italy in the late 14th century, right? In Italy, it was known as pan-Renaissance. Anyways, let's see who were the important writers during this period of Renaissance. 15th century imitators of Chaucer, because Chaucer wrote poetry from 1350 to 1400, these 50 years, and later on, who were the imitators, who were the followers of Chaucer? If somebody asks you, then you can say it was John Lydgate, it was Thomas Hockley. Other poets of this period are Stephen Hawes, Alexander Barclay, and Scott poets William Dunbar, Robert Hennison, and Gavin Douglas. These were some important poets of the 15th century. Okay. Later on, William Caxton introduced or invented printing press in England in 1476. Friends, this is an important landmark in the history of England and also in the history of English literature. William Caxton, he introduced the typewriting machine in those times. So the first printing technology began in England and then later on in Europe. In 1476 it began. Now you must be wondering why we are learning these things, because it's a matter of technology. Printing press, the invention or the introduction of printing press, but it has a very close connection with English literature, because before this date 1476, before this date, there was no printing technology. So what happened? Literature was not much produced. Why? Because there were not many readers, and because there were not many readers, there were not many writers. Why there were not many readers? Because books were not easily available. Books were written manually by the writers. Okay? So mass production of literature was not possible before 1476. But after the invention of this technology, printing technology in England, what happened? All of a sudden there was a blast in English literature. There was a huge rise as far as the number of readers and the number of authors are concerned. After 15th century, if you come to the beginning of 16th century, then on the English poets there was much influence of the Italian poets. Italian influence is found on English poets, like Thomas Wyatt, who is known as an important Renaissance poet. He was responsible for many innovations in English poetry alongside Henry Howard, the Earl of Surrey. Okay, Henry Howard, the Earl of Surrey, and Thomas Wyatt they were the important poets of the beginning of 16th century, and they were much influenced by the Italian poets, namely Petrarch. In Italy there was a poet whose name was Petrarch, and Petrarch wrote Italian sonnets, and these sonnets, Thomas Wyatt, Earl of Surrey, they were influenced by that Petrarchan sonnet, and later on they started writing Petrarchan sonnet, English sonnets in Petrarchan style, in the beginning of the 16th century. Okay, so in the beginning of 16th century, these are considered as the important poets. So friends, here we come to the end of this discussion of the beginning of English literature. But before we leave, let's recall the whole discussion that English literature actually began in the Old English period from 5th to 14th century. Beowulf, an important epic of English literature containing more than 3000 lines, was first written in those times in Old English period. Before that, some oral literature was also existing in England. Later on, during the 15th century, second half of 14th century, Geoffrey Chaucer wrote the Canterbury Tales, which is an important landmark in the history of English literature. Then later on, if you come to the beginning of 16th century, Thomas Wyatt, the Earl of Surrey, and other such poets influenced by the Italian poets, they started writing English literature in the beginning of 16th century. What happened later after 16th century, second half of 16th century, the period of William Shakespeare, Christopher Marlowe, Edmund Spenser, and what happened during 17th, 18th and 19th century and in today's times, that friends we will discuss in our next video. Till then, goodbye and have a nice day. Thank you.